You know.
I think it would be. I think as you examine additional research questions, I think it would be important because one of the things the University of California prides itself on is our ability to create the future scholars, the future researchers, the future thinkers and professors for the field. At least that's what I was taught when I was there. And so that's always one of their missions. And so it'd be interesting to see whether or not the out-of-state students actually find themselves in graduate programs after undergraduate work, whether they're the ones who are entering the field, whether they're the creative and innovative thinkers that the University of California purports to make. In other words, whether having them in our University of California really is a farm team for higher ed, basically, and for research in the future. So that would be important to know what success they bring to the discipline itself, to higher education, in terms of those who attend. I think it would be important to know whether or not we're doing this simply to get the money, or really whether we actually are finding the talent that we say we get when we get out-of-state and foreign students. That we're looking for this additional talent in addition to the talent that's in-state, or whether we really are looking, whether we're, as the folks on the streets would say, really looking at the Benjamin. That would be important to know whether or not those are the elements that are there. So I appreciate your research. I realize that when you do this, there's a zillion and one other questions that have to be answered.
But that's a great one.
But that would be important because when we look at the mission of the University of California, not its original mission, which was to educate the poor people of California, but its current mission is always to talk about higher ed and basically creating the cadre of academic leaders and professors and researchers that really drive the innovation of the California nation. That whether or not in getting these out-of-state students, we actually are getting it. So the comparison between in-state and out-of-state students, if there is a disparity and it doesn't lean in the favorable sense, then it may be to the disadvantage of the University of California with regards to its overall mission to actually recruit all of these out-of-state students who may not have the same drive as some of the other students. As you pointed out, SAT scores are often determined not by so much as the hard effort and work of individuals, but sometimes the environments in which people are raised. And so therefore they have the vocabulary and the other kinds of things that are necessary to have high SAT scores, but sometimes not the drive to do extremely well in class. And we all know that to be true. So whether or not they have the tenacity to hang into these institutions oftentimes doesn't always correlate, as you find some folks who don't have as high SAT score but have a higher drive to get out of circumstances in which they find themselves. And that drives them to not only to do well but to stay in there and overcome the deficiencies and then move on to higher levels of professionalism in the society. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. A few more questions. Assemblymember Williams.
Well, it's mostly comment. First is, as a student who dropped out from high school, I could not agree more with Assemblymember Weber's point. I do think, though, that these numbers tell a story, and I think this is partially my comments partially in answer to Assemblymember Baker's question. I would, just point out, looking at table on page 7 and the table on page 13, I think this comparison really tells a big story. And that story is that while state appropriations were falling dramatically, the UC still complied with its master plan obligation of raising tuition, not just for non-residents, but for residents. You look at those numbers in the decade covered, that's an enrollment increase in UC institutions of about 10,000 students. And you can't enroll 10,000 more subsidized in-state students with less money. That's not a mathematical possibility, particularly when it's such a big drop-off. I mean, if it was a 10% drop-off or something like that, you could do that with efficiency. But the drop-off in appropriations at these institutions is a fourth, a third, or more. And so, we can squeeze more efficiency, but we're never going to enroll 10,000 more students and decrease funding by a fourth or a third, or actually by the by the end of it, we decreased funding 60%. That's just not mathematically possible. And so, we should be the UC's master, at least in terms of the accountability. But to be their master, at least in terms of making sure that they are fulfilling the master plan, which is to enroll the top students of our state, we got to fund them for that. Otherwise, they're going to search and do all sorts of crazy things to try to fund it, which is, I think, what these tables clearly show.
Okay. Last question, Ms. Kim, but just briefly, I don't want to get too sidetracked on this, but Assemblyman Williams, we did have great debate about this in the Budget Committee process, because while the general fund check from the state of California went down, the check for the student aid money via the Cal Grant program went up. So if you look over like a 10-year period, the increase for financial aid went from about $300 million to north of $800 million. And so the actual money that the California state wrote to UC in 2007 was 3.6, and in 2014, 3.8 billion. So it's not quite those apples and oranges, but that's for another day. But here, I do have a question before we get to that. Ms. Kim, go ahead.
Okay, well, I'll make it very quick then, since we did have a lot of questions and discussions regarding the enrollment of resident versus non-resident students at our UC system. So let me just make a quick question to you. Hopefully you can answer this right away. My question has to do with whether or not the non-resident tuitions we charge our students are the same throughout the UC system, and are all campuses using those tuitions received from non-resident students used in the same way?
Okay. So on what is labeled page 12 of the presentation, I realize it's not actually page 12, but it's labeled as such. We have the price of resident versus non-resident tuition. We see that they're just slightly different across UC campuses for non-resident, and that's just due to differences in mandatory fees. I think a representative from the University of California could probably answer this question better. From what I understand, talking to Mark Martin, the UC is, they can charge different campuses can charge different amounts, different non-resident tuition rates for different campuses. That would seem to make some sense because the demand that UC Berkeley has and UCLA is stronger relative demand that, let's say, Riverside has, and they could charge a lot more and still have people waiting in line. But yeah, and then your second question is, what do they do with the revenue? Is that right? I don't know. And that's, one would have to get really inside their budget with a much more detail than I have to know what is done with the money. And I think that so it's some stuff ongoing. Like I have one of my doctoral advisees is working on a study, two studies. One is change over time in institutional aid given to resident versus non-resident students, and secondly is the question of specifically does non-resident tuition revenue cross-subsidize tuition for resident students, looking at what is the net price paid by resident students after factoring in institutional aid, and whether tuition revenue from non-resident students decreases the net price paid by residents. And that research is ongoing. And this whole area is sort of a little bit new, so it's ongoing. I can't say much yet, but I wish we could do a better job for you as researchers to give you more answers to the questions you have, and we'll try to.
What do you need to complete that research? Because I would be very interested. I'm pretty sure my colleagues will be too, because that's the whole purpose of the arguments that we heard from the UC representatives that were here before us, there is a need for increasing the number of non-resident students in order to subsidize the activities and to try to bring in more resident students for their quality programs and activities.
Yeah, I think that research is ongoing, and it's my student, I think, is at the point of having results, and I am very happy to share those results with you. But that will be results at a national level. They might not be representative of what is happening to the UC, and I think I don't know how to do this, but to the extent that someone has knowledge of how resources are allocated within the system, because even research that I provide might not necessarily be reflective of what is happening, how the UC system is using those resources. But it is a central question. I agree.
Okay, one quick question for you, and then we'll hear from our panel, and then we actually may have some follow-up for you based upon the testimony. This year in our budget process, we discussed potentially capping out-of-state enrollment, and just wanted to ask you, based upon your research and panning across the United States, had you heard or seen any state going down that route in basically providing a hard cap on this trend?
The caps from we have, my co-author and I have looked at this for modeling in our papers. It's a variable we wanted to be able to control for, and it was a variable that we found that a cap was set and that it was generally flaunted, and it seemed very soft, and I think it was in part because of sometimes you see if a funding formula isn't funded, then the university says, well, I don't have to do this thing that the funding formula said I had to do. And then when that cap was flaunted of non-resident enrollment, it generally had to do with the university saying, well, you didn't hold up your end of the bargain, therefore we don't have to hold up ours. So I would say if you do, I'll look for a hard example, because I was looking at all 50 states to try to just put this in a model. I will look for a hard example of a specific state that's done this well. Florida comes to mind a little bit, but I'll look at more specifically and get back to you. But I would say if you do start to have that conversation, be very careful about the enrollment measure that you base any policy around, because...
Is it a cap or is it a formula? Like for every 2 in-state students we take, we'll give you 1 out-of-state, something like that?
Right. It's that's up to you. I mean, what I have seen is caps based on percent of students enrolled rather than number. But I've also seen that the policy that a state intended to implement didn't go as planned because the university was able to game the system around what the policymaker wanted to do versus by kind of whether full-time or part-time students are counted in this, how transfer students are counted. So I would just say, you're the one who can decide the policy you want to implement, but I would just say be very careful about the measure you use and think about how that measure could be gamed. It's kind of like any policy. There's incentives and there's gaming that goes on. If you think about that beforehand, that would be the best thing.
Okay. Thank you. I think we're going to proceed now to the next.
Thank you.
Next section on UC admissions and enrollment trends. Stephen Handel, Associate VP of Undergraduate Admissions at the UC Office of the President, and Professor Robert Samuels, a lecturer at UC Santa Barbara.
Should I stay or leave?
Yeah, you can stay there. It'd be great.
I think I'm going next. Yeah, okay, very good.
Okay, we'll start with Mr. Handel.
Thank you.
Chair McCarty, Chair Medina, and members of the committees, thank you for providing me the opportunity to speak with you today about the University of California's admissions policies and practices. I would also say it's also a great honor to be here as well. I can't say it's the high point of my career. I'm still looking for my career. My name is Stephen Handel, and I'm the Associate Vice President for Undergraduate Admissions at the University of California Office of the President. As you requested, I plan to share with you how the university evaluates high school and community college transfer students for admission, provide data regarding the outcomes of our most recent admissions cycle, and describe university's progress in streamlining the transfer process for California's community college students who wish to earn a bachelor's degree. Before delving into some of the statistics related to the current admissions cycle that I know you are interested in exploring, it's helpful to have some context, so I invite you to take a look at slide 2 in the handouts that I believe were given earlier. California's Master Plan for Higher Education, developed in 1960, sets goals for UC. The Master Plan calls for UC to admit students who graduated in the top 12.5% of the statewide high school graduating class. UC implements this commitment by guaranteeing admission to the UC system to students who are top performers in the state, as well as those who are top performers in their individual high school. The university also makes an important commitment to students attending California's community colleges. Under the Master Plan, UC and CSU are asked to maintain a 60-40 ratio between upper and lower division students, which ensures that space is available for California community college students who wish to transfer and earn a baccalaureate. Now, the transfer function represents an important pledge to students throughout the state who wish to take advantage of community colleges' geographic proximity and low tuition costs. This kind of commitment to transfer students is unique for a top research institution around the country. As a result of this admissions policy and UC's long-standing commitment to the Master Plan, the UC is accessible to students from a wide variety of backgrounds. For example, more than 42% of our enrolled students are from low-income families and receive Pell Grants, far more than at any selective research university, public or private. The share of our students from families with parent incomes of under $53,000 a year has grown since 2009-10 from 31% to 35%. Over 41% of our students are first generation in their family to attend and graduate from college. Again, an accomplishment unmatched at highly selective universities around the country. Finally, as a result of the state's steadfast commitment to the Cal Grant program and the university's Blue and Gold plan, also referred to as institutional aid, over half of our undergraduates pay no tuition. We are grateful for the state's support in keeping UC affordable for the full range of California students. To understand how our campuses come to admit and enroll students on whom today's discussion is centered, let me briefly walk you through a typical admission cycle at the university. I'll describe each major step in the cycle and highlight specific issues and processes that I know are of interest to all the members of these committees. You may wish to refer to slide number 3. On August 1st, yes, this month, the undergraduate application opened. Prospective applicants have 4 months to complete their UC application, and there is one application for all 9 UC campuses. And a student may apply to as many UC campuses as he or she wishes. Now, by November 30th, all students interested in attending a UC campus must submit their application to the UC Office of the President. My office then sends the completed applications electronically to the campuses. On average, applicants apply to about 4 UC campuses. It's important to note that although we have a single application, all of the campuses review and evaluate their applications separately. During the months of December, January, and February, campuses review freshman and transfer applications. They're guided in this work by a set of policies developed on behalf of the system by the university's academic senate. And these admissions guidelines are called comprehensive review. Now, comprehensive review is pivotal to the university's ability to identify and admit capable and diverse classes, so let me spend just a bit of time on this. Simply put, comprehensive review is the means by which every application, both freshman and transfer, is reviewed individually and in its entirety by trained readers and evaluators. Our admissions process is not conducted by machine, but rather by professionals trained to assess applicants' qualifications for and ability to benefit from a UC education.